Recently, one of my teachers canceled a discussion about Donald Trump's State of the Union address. She told me that she's held the discussion every year and canceled it because she just couldn't be sure how all the students would respond in this polarized climate. I was terrified. I was scared that I lived in a society so divided we just decide to avoid. I was scared that this would only expand the already growing divide. I was scared this divide even existed. But I also understood. She made this decision out of fear of the polarizing, combative, emotional arguing that nearly always surrounds political conversations. I understood because she was not alone. This happened all over the place. The don't address the elephant in the room. The don't politicize this class. The I think it's just too controversial. The we'll solve this later. The let's wait for a better time to talk. They're all just ways to avoid conversation because of fear of confrontation and tiresome arguing. I understood because I was an arguer. I was one of those unpredictable kids because polarizing topics gave me room to scream my opinion and feel like a winner. For a while, I was attached to arguing. Emotional, addicted, win-hungry, and dead set on proving my opinions right. Simply, I loved it. So, unwilling to change, I fed myself excuses and convinced myself the whole world is structured for argument. Then, I was forced to reconsider. Last summer, I applied to this program called Seeds of Peace. The camp in Maine brings together youth from geopolitical conflicts: the South Asian conflict, Pakistanis and Indians, the Middle Eastern conflict, Palestinians, Israelis, Egyptians, and Jordanians. The entire camp experience is centered around dialogue. For around 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, over 3 weeks, I sat in a room in a circle with kids that were taught to hate the so-called other. Then I went and shared meals with kids that were taught to hate the so-called other. Then I went back to the bunk and shared a room with kids that were taught to hate the so-called other. Dialogue, hate, sharing my excuses to arguing found a brick wall. Here, arguing isn't the status quo, avoiding isn't an option, and they had what I truly needed: dialogue. And this society was not just populated with anyone, but kids that were nurtured to hate the opposing side. Israelis and Palestinians, Pakistanis and Indians are taught distinct histories and taught that the other side is not just wrong, but inhuman. These people live near borders so controversial, wars have erupted over their location. And many of these teenagers who pinned decades of blame and pain on this other side were now dining, conversing, and living together. Terrified and intrigued, I went. Ironically, I was not alone. This place was filled with arguers and avoiders. In the beginning, most people evaded any conversation about the geopolitical conflicts, especially with the other side. When they occurred outside of dialogue, they mostly erupted. I, in the South Asian dialogue, did not talk about any form of conflict until around day 4. We set ground rules and kept most conversations at low intensity before them. Even after that, it felt like we were avoiding the big geopolitical issues for a while. My friends in the Middle East dialogue spent around the first week and a half screaming, crying, and fuming. It seemed that everyone was either arguing or avoiding. I definitely questioned the society of dialogue. One of the Palestinian campers named Sari and I talked a lot about Islam. Early in the 3 weeks, after about 30 minutes of talking about the values of Islam, gender roles, and his practice of faith, he looks at me and goes, "You know, you'd be a good Muslim. You should really consider converting." I told Sari, "Look, I love talking to you about this, but there is just no chance you're going to convince me to convert." It seems ridiculous that Sari even suggested that I convert. That he thought there was a mere chance of our conversation changing something as important as my religion. But that's what was happening the entire first week of camp. People went into conversations expecting the other to convert their views, and that intention always made dialogue a non-starter. Dialogue is about sharing beliefs and stories to create understanding, and the second anyone feels attacked, they resort to arguing and lose the ability to listen with the goal of truly hearing. People's beliefs about this conflict were as important as my religion is to me, and one conversation, no matter how loud or convincing anyone could be, did little to shift people's perspectives drastically. Ironically, in a place with the sole purpose of creating understanding and compassion, we had to overcome the natural, argumentative, defensive nature that we all brought with us. But eventually that nature changed. My bunk rest hours went from card games and stupid joke sharing to spending every hour sitting, Palestinians and Israelis, and talking about the different narratives of the 48 war, or checkpoints, or Jerusalem's importance in the conflict. Literally, there was a day we sat around the beds and the Palestinians explained their narratives of the 48 war, and Israelis politely interjected when their opinions differed. It was polite, without aggression. My dialogue group turned from laying ground rules to screaming across national lines about the partition to eventually listening and understanding. It wasn't constant. There were days when my Palestinian friends were screaming, "Your family lives on my blood," and days when my Indian friends screamed, "Kashmir is theirs." But most of the days, my entire bunk, Palestinians and Israelis, actually talked about issues. And most days, my entire dialogue, Pakistanis and Indians, conversed about terrorism and Kashmir and gender roles and more. Despite the fact that most people's views didn't change, mine did drastically. I went to a Jewish day school, and through that, my temple, and my family, Zionism became relatively ingrained in me. I viewed the state of Israel as a basic right of the Jewish people that was fair and just. So, through all the conversations and depressing stories, the only ones that changed the way I look at the conflict were the ones told to share, to help me empathize so I can understand. The stories of my Israeli friend's house being blown up, my Palestinian friends explaining how their families became refugees after the 48 war, my Israeli friends having rocks being thrown at him and his friends' houses, my Palestinian friends explaining at a checkpoint he was pinned up against a car for forgetting his ID at home. They were all tragic, but they only changed my opinions because they were told with the intent of helping me empathize and understand. When they were told to prove their ideologies right, when they were told to make me feel for their suffering and adopt their beliefs, I became combative and resorted to my ingrained Zionist views. Their genuine interest in giving me perspective and understanding is what made me reconsider. But I was one of the few. Most people's views did not change. So if it didn't change perspectives, what did these teens gain from this experience? I bet a lot of you are thinking that's great that these conflict-ridden kids sang Kumbaya, dialogues about conflict, and saying, "I am a seed of peace." But they went home to their conflict, to all that hate. So what did they really gain even if their views remain the same? I've struggled with this a lot. The answer is a love for the people they can easily hate. This love rooted in empathy, listening, and sharing is a powerful force. People started recognizing the nuances to the other side's stories. It wasn't black and white. They started sharing stories to help the other side understand their struggles and narratives. And that's why I can confidently say 181 campers struggled through arguing, took conversations, and created dense dialogue. On the first night of camp, one of my Israeli friends shared that he is at camp because he believes Israel is a bubble, and he thinks this experience will help him pop that bubble. Too often, to no fault of our own, people are engulfed in bubbles that shape their views of issues and conflicts, giving them no opportunity to hear or understand the other side. Just like my Israeli friend needed the empathy he gained from dialogue to pop his bubble, so does everyone. That's the role I played at camp. Just like everyone else, I wanted to pop my bubbles. I think the only true way to create understanding that pops bubbles, is through engaging in dialogue. Dialogue will rarely be the easiest or most comfortable choice, but its benefits will make meaningful change. One Israeli seed, Noah, told me she thinks the same way and is even more sure of her viewpoint after dialoguing. But she understands that there's always another side who might be just as right. She also told me I wish every kid could have the opportunity to go through an experience such as this. It will change his or her entire view over our reality. This way, people from all sides will remember that the other side is human like everyone else. What we are doing isn't working. America and the world is divided along partisan lines, and there is no sign of dialogue, understanding, empathy, or change. Arguing is not taking us anywhere. It breeds disconnection and dismantles empathy. The problems we face are massive, polarizing, and incredibly intimidating. Frankly, I believe dialogue is the only way to conquer the topics that feel unconquerable. I believe, actually I know, arguing is the first step to change, understanding the beginning of bridging gaps. We have the opportunity to create understanding in a world that clearly does not have enough of it, to empathize, to initiate change, to create the world that could be. Inarguably, dialogue is required. Thank you.